Commander Zeth had seen many things in his 30 cycles. As leader of the Nexari hunting fleet, he had witnessed the glass cities of Keltera burn under plasma fire. He had watched entire species beg for mercy before his claws. He had earned his reputation as the most feared predator in 3 star systems. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. His twin cubs were missing. "Sir!" Lieutenant Corax burst through the command chamber doors, his usually composed demeanor shattered like cheap armor plating. The security feeds showed them entering the human detention sector at 0400 hours. They never came out. Zeth's massive frame went rigid, his 4 arms clenched into fists that could crush steel. The ridge along his spine flared with bioluminescent fury, casting an eerie blue glow across the darkened bridge. The human sector? Which human? The one we captured from the research station on Gamma 7, sir. Subject designation Marcus Chan. A sound escaped Zeth's throat that was part growl, part roar, and entirely terrifying. The other bridge crew members instinctively stepped back. They had seen their commander tear apart enemy ships with his bare hands. But this was different. This was personal. How long have they been missing? 6 hours, sir. 6 hours. Zeth's mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. His cubs, Nira and Kale, barely 3 cycles old, were curious beyond reason and fearless beyond sense. They had somehow bypassed the ship's most secure detention area to get to the human prisoner. The human, Marcus Chun, the laughably small creature they had captured during their raid on the human research facility. Zeth remembered the pathetic thing trying to shield the other researchers with his own body, as if his soft flesh could stop Nexari plasma weapons. They had kept him alive for information extraction, though he had proven surprisingly uncooperative. "Prepare a strike team," Zeth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied. "Full combat gear. If that human has harmed my cubs—" "Sir," Corax interrupted carefully, "perhaps we should consider that the detention cell security systems show no signs of struggle or distress calls. The locks are still functioning normally." Zeth turned slowly, his predatory eyes fixing on his lieutenant. "Are you suggesting I should not be concerned about my offspring being trapped with an alien species known for their unpredictable violence?" Corax swallowed hard. Everyone in the fleet knew about human combat records. They might be physically weak compared to Nexari, but their psychological profiles were disturbing. Humans were the only species that had ever made the Nexari Military Council issue official warnings about prolonged exposure to their prisoners. "Of course not, sir. Strike team will be ready in 5 minutes." Zeth nodded curtly and began his march toward the detention sector, his heavy footsteps echoing through the corridors like drumbeats of impending doom. Crew members pressed themselves against bulkheads as he passed, recognizing the particular gait of their commander when he was hunting. The detention sector was located in the ship's most secure area, surrounded by triple-layered energy shields and monitored by enough sensors to track a fly's heartbeat. As they approached, Zeth could hear something that made his blood freeze. Laughter. Not the cruel laughter of a captor tormenting prisoners, but genuine, joyful laughter. Children's laughter. His cubs' laughter. The strike team exchanged confused glances. This was not what they had expected. "Override the cell locks," Zeth commanded, his voice barely controlled. "Sir, the locks show they're already disengaged from the inside. The cell has been unlocked for hours." What fresh madness was this? Zeth pushed past his team and manually opened the detention cell door, preparing for the worst. The sight that greeted him defied every instinct, every prediction, every nightmare scenario he had imagined. His cubs were indeed in the cell. They were curled up on either side of the human, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, all 3 of them fast asleep. Nira had her small head resting against the human's left shoulder, while Kale was practically in his lap. The human's arms were protectively wrapped around both cubs. But that was not the most shocking part. The most shocking part was what surrounded them. The entire cell had been transformed. What had been a sterile, intimidating detention chamber now looked like, well, like a den. Blankets that Zeth recognized from his own quarters had been arranged into a comfortable sleeping area. Food containers, empty but clean, were stacked neatly in one corner. Most bewildering of all, There were drawings covering the walls, crude but recognizable images of spaceships, planets, and what appeared to be stick figures of Nexri and humans playing together. "What in the seven hells?" Lieutenant Korax whispered. The human, this Marcus Chun, must have sensed their presence because his eyes slowly opened. When he saw the heavily armed strike team, he carefully shifted position to better shield the cubs with his body, moving with the quiet precision of someone trying not to wake sleeping children. "Commander Vorkul," the human said softly, and there was no fear in his voice. "None whatsoever. Your kids are incredible. I hope you don't mind, but they were hungry when they found me, so I share my rations with them." Zeth stared. The human was protecting his cubs. From him. From their own father. They unlocked the cell? Marcus smiled, and it was a gentle expression that seemed completely at odds with everything the Nexri knew about human facial expressions. Smart as plasma whips, these two. Took them about 10 minutes to figure out your lock system. I tried to get them to go back to their quarters, but they said they wanted to see what humans were really like. Nira stirred in her sleep, making a small chittering sound that was pure contentment. Kale's tail curled more tightly around the human's arm. And Zeth found himself asking, his voice barely a whisper. "And we talked. They asked me about Earth, about human cubs. Children, we call them children. I told them stories. They told me about growing up on a warship, about wanting to see planets with blue skies and green grass. They fell asleep about an hour ago." The strike team stood frozen, weapons lowered but still ready. This was so far outside their understanding of prisoner-captor dynamics that several of them were wondering if they were experiencing some kind of shared hallucination. "You could have escaped," Zeth observed. Marcus actually chuckled, a sound so warm it made something twist uncomfortably in Zeth's chest. "Where exactly would I go on your ship, Commander? Besides, someone needed to make sure they didn't get into real trouble. Do you have any idea how curious your cubs are? Nira tried to reprogram your food synthesizer to make Earth chocolate. Kale wanted to know if he could breathe in space without a helmet. Despite everything, despite years of conditioning and instinct, Zeth felt his mouth twitch upward. Yes, that sounded exactly like his cubs. "They missed you," Marcus continued quietly. "Kept asking when Papa would come play with them, when Papa would tell them stories like I was doing. I get the impression you've been busy." The words hit Zeth harder than enemy fire ever had. He had been busy. The fleet needed constant attention. There were always raids to plan, territories to secure, enemies to crush. When was the last time he had simply sat with his cubs and listened to their questions about the universe? "I was coming to rescue them," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "From what?" Marcus asked gently. "From stories about planets where it rains liquid water instead of acid? From learning that human children like to build blanket forts and play games with friends? From discovering that maybe the universe isn't quite as scary as they thought?" Zeth looked at his sleeping cubs again. In the harsh lighting of the ship's corridors, they always seemed so small, so vulnerable. Here, surrounded by makeshift comfort and protected by gentle arms, they looked peaceful, happy. When was the last time he had seen them look this content? "Why?" he asked finally. "Why protect them? Why care for them? We are your enemies. We destroyed your research station. We killed your colleagues." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand moving to gently smooth down Nira's raised spinal ridge in a gesture that was purely paternal. "Because they're children, Commander. And children are never the enemy. They're just children, trying to understand a big, confusing universe. Just like human children. Just like I was once upon a time." Something was happening to Zeth that he didn't understand. Some fundamental shift in his worldview, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath his consciousness. He had built his entire identity around being a predator, a hunter, a force of destruction. His cubs were supposed to inherit that legacy, to become the next generation of Nexri warriors. But looking at them now, peaceful and protected in the arms of their supposed enemy, he wondered if perhaps there was something else they could become. Something better. "Your species fascinates me," he said finally. Marcus smiled again, that same gentle expression. "We fascinate ourselves, Commander. usually not in good ways. The human shifted slightly, and Kale made a small protesting sound in his sleep. Tiny claws gripping Marcus's shirt more tightly. The human immediately stilled, waiting until a small charge settled back into peaceful slumber. "They're going to wake up soon," Marcus said softly, "and they're going to want to show you the pictures they drew. Fair warning. Nira's artistic interpretation of you makes you look like a friendly dragon, and Kale drew what he thinks Earth looks like. It involves a lot more rainbows than are scientifically accurate." Zeth felt that strange twisting sensation in his chest again. "You let them draw pictures?" "Commander, when was the last time you let your cubs just be cubs? Not future warriors, not heirs to your military legacy. Just children who want color outside the lines and ask impossible questions about why space is black and whether stars have names." The question hit him like a physical blow. The answer was simple and terrible. Never. From the moment they could walk, they had been in training. Combat simulations, tactical studies, weapons practice. He had been preparing them for war, since they could barely form sentences. "I was making them strong," he said, but the words sounded weak even to him. "They are strong, Commander. Stronger than you know. It takes incredible courage to sneak into an enemy's cell, because you're curious about them. It takes wisdom beyond their years to see past everything they've been taught and decide to judge for themselves. Your cubs, they're remarkable." Nira began to stir, her large eyes blinking open slowly. When she saw her father standing there with his strike team, she should have been frightened. She should have immediately moved away from the human and returned to her father's side. Instead, she smiled sleepily and said, "Papa, you came. Marcus, look, Papa's here. Can you tell Papa the story about the human cubs who built a treehouse? Please." And in that moment, Commander Zeth, terror of 3 star systems, realized that everything he thought he knew about strength, about family, about the universe itself, was about to change forever. The Predator's cubs had gone missing, and they had found something he never expected them to find. They had found P. 3 hours later, Zeth found himself in the most surreal situation of his military career. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor of what had formerly been a detention cell, watching his cubs teach a human prisoner how to play Nexary Battlestones, while Marcus simultaneously tried to explain the concept of hopscotch using food containers as markers. "No, no, Papa." Nira giggled, her small claws clicking against the gaming stones. "You have to throw it like Marcus showed us. See? Gentle like falling leaves, not like shooting plasma bolts." Zeth looked at the stone in his massive hand, then at his daughter's expectant face, then at the human who was somehow managing not to laugh at the sight of the most feared commander in the sector struggling with a children's game. "Falling leaves," he muttered, adjusting his grip. "Right." The stone landed exactly where he intended it to, because Nexary warriors did not miss their targets. Kale applauded enthusiastically, while Marcus gave him an encouraging nod. "Excellent technique, Commander," Marcus said with what might have been barely suppressed amusement, "though I think you might be overthinking the physics of it." "I do not overthink," Zeth replied stiffly. "Papa always overthinks everything," Kale announced cheerfully, completely oblivious of the fact that he had just contradicted the most dangerous predator in known space. "Remember when you spent 6 hours planning how to fix the food dispenser in our quarters?" Marcus fixed ours in 10 minutes with a bent eating utensil. Marcus coughed delicately. "Well, to be fair, your father probably has more pressing concerns than food dispensers." "Like what?" Nira asked, settling herself more comfortably against Zeth's side. The casual affection in the gesture made something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Like conquest, Zeth thought automatically. Like maintaining fleet discipline. Like ensuring the Nexary Empire's continued dominance through superior firepower and strategic intimidation. "Like making sure you two don't rewire any more ship systems," he said instead, surprising himself. Both cubs burst into laughter, and Marcus smiled that same gentle smile that was beginning to unravel everything Zeth thought he understood about humans. "In our defense," Marcus said, "they were trying to improve the environmental controls to simulate different planetary atmospheres. Nira wanted to know what it would feel like to breathe the air on a garden world." "A garden world?" Zeth's voice sharpened slightly. The cubs had never shown interest in anything beyond military vessels and space stations. Marcus told us about planets where the ground is covered in soft green plants and the sky changes colors. Cale explained, his young voice full of wonder. He said, birds, Marcus clarified. They're called birds. And rain. The water drops are called rain. Zeth stared at the human. You told him about your home world? I told him about beauty, Marcus replied simply. About things that exist just because they're wonderful, not because they serve a strategic purpose. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Zeth had never considered that anything could exist without serving a purpose. Everything in his world had function, had meaning within the context of power and survival. Papa, Nira said suddenly, do you think we could see one of these garden worlds someday? The question struck him like a physical blow. His cubs, asking to see beauty instead of conquest, wanting to experience wonder instead of victory. Nira, he began carefully, our life is among the stars. The fleet is our home. But Marcus says home isn't just where you live. It's where you feel safe and happy and loved. She looked up at him with those large, trusting eyes. Don't you feel safe and happy and loved anywhere besides the ship, Papa? The silence that followed was deafening. Zeth realized that he couldn't answer the question because he had never asked it of himself. Safety, yes. He understood tactical advantage and defensive positions. But happiness? Love? Your father has responsibilities, Marcus said gently, sensing Zeth's discomfort. Important duties that keep you and the fleet safe. But who keeps Papa safe? Cale asked with a devastating logic that only children possess. Who makes sure Papa feels happy and loved? Marcus's expression softened as he looked at Zeth, and there was something uncomfortably perceptive in his gaze. That's a very good question, Cale. Zeth stood abruptly, his massive frame suddenly feeling too large for the small space. I should return you to your quarters. The crew will begin to question my absence. Let them question, Marcus said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made Zeth pause. When was the last time your crew saw you as anything other than their commander? When was the last time your cubs saw you as anything other than a military leader who happens to be their father? The human's words cut deeper than any weapon Zeth had ever faced. He turned slowly, his predatory instincts warring with emotions he couldn't name. You know nothing about my relationship with my cubs. Don't I? Marcus stood as well. And despite being half Zeth's size, there was something formidable about his calm certainty. I know that Nira hasn't seen you smile in 3 months. I know that Cale practices combat forms in his sleep because he's afraid of disappointing you. I know that both of them think their only value to you is their potential as future warriors. They are the heirs to my legacy, Zeth said, but the words sounded hollow. They're children. Marcus's voice finally carried real emotion, a flash of anger that transformed his gentle features. They're beautiful, curious, loving children who want their father to play games with them and tell them stories and maybe, just maybe, see them as more than future soldiers in your war machine. The accusation hung in the air like a plasma charge ready to detonate. Zeth felt his spinal ridge flare with automatic aggression. But underneath the instinctive response was something else. Something that felt suspiciously like shame. You dare lecture me about parenting? You're a prisoner. An enemy. Am I? Marcus asked quietly. Because 3 hours ago, your cubs ran away from everything you taught them to find something they were missing. They didn't run to another warrior or a battle simulator or a tactical training session. They ran to stories about rain and birds and worlds where things grow just because they're beautiful. Zeth looked at his cubs, who were watching this exchange with wide, worried eyes. Nira had moved protectively closer to Cale, and both of them looked afraid, not of Marcus, but of their father's anger. When had his children started being afraid of him? Papa? Nira's voice was very small. Are you angry with us for coming to see Marcus? The question broke something inside Zeth's chest. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to his cubs' eye level, and saw his reflection in their worried faces. When had he become the kind of father who made his children afraid to explore, to question, to seek joy? No, little star, he said softly, using Nira's baby name for the first time in months. I'm not angry with you. But you're angry with Marcus, Cale observed with uncomfortable accuracy. Zeth looked at the human, who was watching this family moment with careful neutrality. Marcus Chun, who had protected his cubs when they needed protection, who had fed them when they were hungry, who had given them something Zeth was beginning to realize he had never provided. Unconditional acceptance of their curiosity. I'm not angry with Marcus either, Zeth admitted, the words feeling strange in his mouth. I'm angry with myself. The confession seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including Zeth himself. Why, Papa? Nira asked, settling back against his side with the fearless affection of a child who trusts completely. Because, Zeth said slowly, working through thoughts that felt foreign and uncomfortable, I think I forgot something very important. What? Both cubs asked in unison. Zeth looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly, and then back at his children. I forgot that before you are warriors, before you are heirs to anything, before you're anything else, you are my cubs, and I love you more than all the stars and all the systems we've ever conquered. The words seemed to light up their faces like small suns. We love you too, Papa, Kale said solemnly, even when you forget to play games with us. Even when you're too busy for stories, Nira added. Zeth felt something wet on his face and realized with shock that he was crying. Nexri warriors did not cry. Commanders did not show emotional vulnerability. Leaders did not break down in front of prisoners. But fathers, apparently, sometimes did. Commander, Marcus said quietly, what if I told you there's a way to give your cubs everything they're looking for without losing who you are? Zeth wiped his face with the back of one massive hand. I would say that sounds too good to be true. The research station you raided wasn't developing weapons, Marcus said. We were cataloging garden worlds, planets suitable for colonization, for families, for children to grow up seeing rain and birds and things that exist just because they're beautiful. The admission hung in the air like a revelation. Zeth stared at him. You're xenobiologists? Xenobiologists, terraforming specialists, atmospheric engineers. We were mapping the habitable worlds in this sector. Marcus smiled sadly. We weren't your enemies, Commander. We were just people trying to find homes. But the plasma weapons signatures we detected, asteroid mining equipment. We were clearing debris from potential colony sites. Marcus shrugged. Your intel was wrong. Zeth felt the universe tilt around him. They had attacked a peaceful research mission. They had killed scientists whose only crime was wanting to find beautiful places for families to live. Papa? Nira was looking at him with concern. You look sad. I am sad, little star. I made a very big mistake. Can you fix it? Kale asked with the simple faith that children have in their parents' ability to make things right. Zeth looked at Marcus, who was watching him with something that might have been hope. I don't know, Zeth said honestly, but I think I'd like to try. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since this impossible day began, it reached his eyes. Well then, Commander, Marcus said, settling back down on the makeshift bed of blankets, why don't we start with those stories about garden worlds? Your cubs have a lot of questions about rain. And as Zeth lowered himself to the floor between his children, listening to a human prisoner describe worlds where water fell like tears of joy from painted skies, he realized that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from the courage to admit you were wrong. The predator's cubs had gone missing, and in finding them, Zeth had found something he never knew he was looking for. He had found his way home.